This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another deck history. In this series I discuss prominent deck archetypes from their origins until the modern day. As usual, I ran a poll last week that allowed the viewers to decide the topic of this video, and I gave voters a choice between two different multi-format decks built around a single card, and in the end, Krark-Clan Ironworks managed to beat out Primeval Titan. Krark-Clan Ironworks, which often has its name shortened to KCI, is a powerful mana engine from 5th Dawn. It's a 4-mana artifact that allows you to sacrifice your artifacts to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Obviously, this has the potential to generate insane amounts of mana, and Krark-Clan Ironworks decks are those that prominently feature the card as a combo piece and source of mana. At one time or another, Krark-Clan Ironworks decks have found success in Standard, Modern, and Vintage, and in this video we'll take a look at what the deck looked like in these various formats, and discuss how and why the deck changed over time. Before we start talking about the deck in Standard, I just want to remind you all that there are new channel memberships available as well as Nitsahone merch. You can find those links in the description. So, Standard was the first format where a Krark-Clan Ironworks deck rose to prominence. Manuel Bavon piloted his KCI deck to a top 8 finish at Worlds in 2004. Unsurprisingly, this deck is loaded up with a bunch of artifacts, with the intention of sacrificing all of them to produce enough mana to win the game. Most of the artifacts in the deck produce mana too, so the deck can really generate insane amounts of mana. These mana artifacts include Pentad Prism, a couple of talismans, and Chrome Mox. This lets you get your Ironworks out as quickly as possible, in addition to just generating a ton of mana once the Ironworks is in play. Every single land in the deck is also an artifact, so the deck can sacrifice every single permanent in it for mana. The deck also has 2 separate win conditions. One of them is pretty straightforward: Fireball. You can pump a ton of mana into X from the Ironworks and win the game that way. The other method is a little more complex. It involves Mirror Incubator, which you can use to exile every artifact in your deck, including your lands, to make a bunch of 1/1s. You could use those 1/1s to go wild with Ironworks potentially, or just to kill your opponent, but you can also just combine the Incubator with Goblin Charbelcher. Because you exiled all the lands in your deck, it will just do lethal damage to your opponent when you activate it, and because of the Ironworks mana, you can do this all in one turn without too much effort. The deck also runs a ton of card draw as well as Fabricate to search up the Incubator, Ironworks, and Charbelcher, so it was pretty consistent. Ultimately, this deck ended up getting banned out of Standard in early 2005, when all the artifact lands were banned out of the format. Ironworks decks definitely were not the main target of this ban, Affinity decks were, but Ironworks decks also benefited hugely from those lands, so it also ceased to exist as a result of them getting banned. After that, it would be a while before another Krark-Clan Ironworks deck found significant success. The powerful artifact wouldn't really show up again until 2012 when it was featured in a modern deck. In 2012, Sebastian Deno finished in the top 16 of Pro Tour Return to Ravnica with his Sunny Side Up deck. Artifact lands that aren't Darksteel Citadel are banned in Modern, so the deck didn't have access to quite the same number of artifacts, but it was still jam-packed with cheap artifacts that produce mana and cantrip, which are often called eggs, and that's where the deck's funny name comes from the eggs combined with Second Sunrise, which you can use to bring back all of your artifacts after you sack them. The deck can also use Faith's Reward in a similar fashion, and you can basically just cycle through all of these by drawing a bunch of cards in your deck and producing a bunch of mana until you have enough mana for a lethal Banefire. The deck only ran 2 Ironworks, but it had enough cheap ways to draw cards as well as reshape, so it wasn't that hard to consistently get it. Ultimately, this is another KCI deck that got banned out of the format, as Second Sunrise would get banned in 2013. It is notable that later versions of this deck didn't actually use the Ironworks, but the ban of Second Sunrise still meant that KCI wasn't going to find a home in Modern for a while. While the power level of the deck was part of the problem here, there was also a huge problem with how long it took this type of deck to combo off. The combo could take up to 15 minutes, and this was creating some pretty huge logistical problems, so banning Second Sunrise was just as much about keeping modern rounds from taking way too long as it was about how powerful a deck like this was. Another modern Krark-Clan Ironworks deck would emerge in 2018, and this time around it proved to be a pretty consistent performer, especially for one player in particular. In 2018, Matt Nass top-8'd Grand Prix Phoenix with his KCI deck. Remember his name because he was an absolute master at piloting this deck, as he top-8'd 4 2018 and 2019 Grand Prix with the deck, even winning 2 of them. I'm fairly sure he holds the record for the player to have the most success with a single deck in a single format. Anyway, let's take a look at what his deck looked like in 2018. It runs many of the same eggs that were used in the 2012 version of the deck, but there was one relatively new card that really enabled the deck to produce absurd amounts of mana without having to rely on cards like Second Sunrise and Faith's Reward. Instead, the linchpin of the deck is Aether Revolt's Scrap Trawler. Scrap Trawler gives you a huge payoff for sacrificing artifacts to the Ironworks. Every time you sacrifice one of your artifacts, the Trawler lets you get back an artifact from your graveyard with a lower mana value than the sacrificed card. So this generally means you can sacrifice an artifact, get another back, sacrifice that artifact, and go down a chain of artifacts, resulting in a ton of mana. The deck also has dozens of different ways it can loop various artifacts together to win the game. In addition to the Trawler, Myr Retriever is also crucial, as it allows you to get back an artifact regardless of its mana value, which can allow you to create an infinite loop. All you need is the Retriever, the Trawler, the Ironworks, and 2 artifacts that cost 2 or less. Things do get kind of complicated here, and that's what makes it all the more impressive that Matt Nass was so good at piloting this deck, because to say the combo is complicated is probably an understatement. Let's take a look at one example of how the deck can go off, and arguably the most complicated one because it involves some arcane rules interactions. So, once your board has Retriever, Trawler, Ironworks, and 2 other 2-mana artifacts like Mox Opal and Chromatic Star, you have what you need for an infinite loop that will allow you to draw your entire deck. So, the Mox Opal can be tapped to produce 1 mana, and then sacrificed to the Ironworks. Then you activate Chromatic Sphere, and this is where things get weird. In response, you sacrifice Myr Retriever and Ironworks to itself, so you're at 7 mana. Then the Retriever's ability triggers once, and the Scrap Trawler triggers twice. This combo takes advantage of how we pay mana for abilities. When you pay mana for the sphere, you can technically produce a bunch of mana to pay for that ability, and that counts sacrificing stuff to the Ironworks, and this causes some weird stuff to happen in the game. Because you sacrifice all of the stuff to the Ironworks while the sphere is being activated, all these abilities only go on the stack once a player is about to get priority. The sphere's ability resolves before any player has priority, and when that happens, everything is already in the graveyard. You have to be careful not to just sacrifice things willy-nilly with this combo. You have to be doing the sacrificing after announcing the use of an ability from something like the Sphere or Terrarion, because otherwise the Ironworks wouldn't be in the graveyard when you have to pick targets for the Retriever's ability. In other words, all of the cards end up in the graveyard before you make any decisions about what you're targeting with Myr Retriever and Scrap Trawler. If you do it this way, you have the option of all the cards you sacrificed, and this means you use the Retriever to return Krark-Clan Ironworks, and Scrap Trawler to return the Myr Retriever. Then the Trawler also returns the Sphere and the Opal to the battlefield, and then you can recast everything with all your mana and do it all over again. This loop lets you eventually draw your whole library, and there are other combos in the deck that allow you to loop and make as much mana as you want, and obviously being able to make as much mana as you want or draw as many cards as you want is going to help you win the game. There are lots of things you can do once you have all of this mana, like hardcast Emrakul the Eon's Torn or a massive Hangerback Walker. You can also create a loop that keeps getting you back Pyrite Spellbomb over and over, and you can use it to eventually kill your opponent. It might sound like this deck is really convoluted and it's hard to get the combo pieces in play, but it had a couple of advantages. One of them is that there are a lot of interchangeable parts. You can get a powerful combo with a lot of different cards in this deck. Another thing that made it really consistent was Ancient Stirrings and Inventor's Fair, both of which could find you the artifact that you really needed. So this deck took a very skilled player who knew all the intricacies of the rules of the game, and it is probably the most convoluted and complicated combo that has been successful at Magic's highest level of competition. Even Flash Hulk is more simple than this is, mostly because it's more intuitive. Talking about all these complicated combos gives me an idea for an MTG top 10. But anyway, The deck didn't change a ton in 2018, but by 2019 the deck had one important new tool, Psi Master Thopterus. Psi gives you a 1/1 Thopter token every time you cast an artifact spell, and obviously this deck can cast as many artifact spells as it wants when it assembles the right combo. He can also sacrifice artifacts himself, which gives you another way to get artifacts into the graveyard, in addition to Krark-Clan Ironworks. By 2019, KCI decks also featured Spine of Ish-Sa, which you can loop over and over to destroy every permanent your opponent controls, including their lands, so it's pretty hard for them to ever come back from that, effectively making this another win condition. At Grand Prix Oakland in 2019, there were 4 KCI decks in the top 8, and after that event, Krark-Clan Ironworks got banned out of Modern. The deck had already been a pretty significant problem, both because it took advantage of some weird quirks in the rules, and because it took forever to combo off, so we're seeing this problem again. The addition of Psi had made the deck even better, and this meant a lot of the deck was being played and really slowing down events the more people were playing it. It also had the weird problem of not really being executable on Magic Online, since it took advantage of such a weird quirk in the rules. So in the end, the main reason was that the deck was just too powerful, but the fact that it didn't work in digital, was incredibly complicated and hard to understand, and was incredibly slow at comboing off, also played a role in the card getting the axe. I'm not sure one player has ever done more to get a single card ban than Matt Nass did. While he didn't hold every top 8 with the deck, between 2018 and 2019, there were a total of 9 Premier Event top 8s with the deck, and he held 4 of them, which is pretty crazy. Even before his success with the KCI deck, he was known as a great combo player, but as a result of his success with KCI in Modern, he's a candidate for the title of Best Combo Player Ever. Obviously enough, the banning of the Ironworks brought an end to KCI decks in Modern, and it doesn't seem super likely we'll get to see it unbanned in the future. However, we do still have one more format to discuss, and that's Vintage, where KCI decks first began to find success in 2020. Unsurprisingly, this version of the deck also looks to abuse Scrap Trawler, and it works much in the same way. However, instead of looting to win the game by producing a bunch of mana, this version of the deck instead looks to loop the artifacts together and sacrifice them to Arcbound Ravager, who can feast on an endless supply of artifacts until he's able to simply swing for lethal. The Ravager itself also combines really well with Scrap Trawler and can create some loops, and because of the nature of Vintage, this combo can go off as early as turn 2, which is pretty insane. The deck can also use Karn the Great Creator to wish a win condition out of the sideboard, like a huge stone coil serpent. If we look at the most recent version of the deck, you can see it hasn't changed a ton, although it doesn't rely on Ravager at all anymore. It can still wish up a win condition with Karn the Great Creator, or it can set up a lock with Time Vault and Manifold Key, at which point you can slowly kill your opponent by attacking with creatures. It also has the powerful Urza's Saga, which can not only tutor up stuff you want, it can make a massive construct that can close out the game for you. So that's the history of Krark-Clan Ironworks decks. It ultimately got banned out of existence in both Standard and Modern, but the deck does live on in Vintage if you're interested in sacrificing a bunch of artifacts to the Ironworks. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on the almost 40 other episodes of deck history, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can do that in a number of ways, either on Patreon, by buying merch, or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching.